My stepson posted a video on social media that he thought was private. I saw it when his friend tagged me by mistake in the comments. I heard him say, "I honestly can't wait for the old man to die so I can finally get what's coming to me. That house, the money, everything. He's not my real father anyway, just some pharmaceutical suit who thinks buying me stuff means he owns me." I didn't say anything, but at that moment, something in me broke. I walked straight to my home office and called my estate attorney at 7 p.m. on a Friday evening. When he came back from his weekend in the Hamptons, expecting to ask for more money for his latest startup idea, there was a surprise waiting for him. New will documents removing him completely and establishing the Aurelia Frost Memorial Scholarship in his place. $5.2 million that would now help deserving students instead of funding his entitled lifestyle. And then I realized he wouldn't just accept this quietly. This was just the beginning. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. Let me take you back to how this all started, because you need to understand just how much Quentin Vaughn meant to me, and how deeply his betrayal cut through 17 years of unconditional love, sacrifice, and the kind of devotion I thought only biological fathers could feel for their children. I met Isabella Morrison in November 2006 at the American Society of Clinical Oncology conference in Boston. I was 47 years old then, a pharmaceutical executive who'd spent 2 decades climbing the corporate ladder at Biotech Solutions, developing treatments that helped millions of patients worldwide manage chronic conditions and life-threatening diseases. I was successful, financially secure with a 7-figure salary and stock options, but emotionally isolated after prioritizing career advancement over personal relationships throughout my 30s and early 40s. The conference was being held at the Boston Convention Center, and I was there to present our company's latest breakthrough in targeted cancer therapies. It was cutting-edge work that could potentially extend lives by years rather than months, the kind of research that justified the long hours and intense pressure of pharmaceutical development. Isabella was 39, a brilliant pediatric oncology researcher at Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York, and a single mother raising her 8-year-old son after his biological father had abandoned them both when the child was just 6 years old. She was presenting groundbreaking research on targeted therapies for childhood leukemia, work that would eventually save thousands of young lives and revolutionize how we approach treating cancer in children. I remember the exact moment I first saw her. She was standing at a podium in Conference Room C, speaking to an audience of 200 oncologists about her clinical trial results with a confidence and passion that commanded complete attention. Her data showed a 37% improvement in survival rates for children with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, numbers that represented real families who would get to keep their children because of her work. During the coffee break after her presentation, I approached her with what I thought was a professional question about drug development timelines and regulatory approval processes. We ended up talking for 3 hours, walking through the streets of downtown Boston, discussing everything from pharmaceutical patent law to the ethics of pricing life-saving medications for families who couldn't afford them. "My son Quentin asks me why some kids get better and others don't," she told me as we sat on a bench in Boston Common that evening, watching the last light fade over the city. "I tell him that's exactly why Mommy works so hard, to make sure more kids get to go home healthy to their families." The way she talked about her son made my chest tighten with something I'd never experienced before. This wasn't just professional dedication. This was a mother fighting for every child who reminded her of her own. Over the next few weeks, Isabella and I began talking regularly. She'd call me from her lab late at night, and I'd call her from my office in Westchester County, sharing frustrations about FDA approval delays and discussing new research methodologies. But our conversations always came back to Quentin, this 8-year-old boy who'd become the center of her world after his biological father walked out. "He's shy, but incredibly intelligent," she told me during one of our evening phone calls in December 2006. "Carries himself with the careful politeness of a child who's learned that adults can't always be trusted to stay. His biological father, Arden Kane, just disappeared one day when Quentin was 6, left behind nothing but unpaid bills, broken promises, and a little boy who kept asking when Daddy was coming home. When I finally met Quentin during my first visit to their modest two-bedroom apartment in Cambridge, I was struck by how much he reminded me of myself at that age, serious, observant, carrying himself with a maturity that seemed too heavy for his small shoulders. But there was also curiosity there, a bright intelligence that lit up when he talked about science projects or asked detailed questions about how pharmaceutical companies developed new medicines. "Are you the man who's going to help Mommy save more kids?" he asked me during that first visit, looking up from the chemistry set he'd been working with at their kitchen table. "I hope so," I told him, and meant it in ways I was only beginning to understand. Isabella and I were married in June 2007 at a small ceremony in the Berkshire Mountains, surrounded by colleagues from both the pharmaceutical and medical research communities. But the moment that changed my life forever happened during our honeymoon week at a lake house in New Hampshire. Quentin had come with us. Isabella wasn't ready to leave him with babysitters, and honestly I couldn't imagine the trip without him. On our third day there, as we sat on the dock watching the sunset paint the water gold and orange, Quentin looked up at me with those serious 8-year-old eyes and asked, "Can I call you Dad now?" I nearly broke down crying right there on that dock. This little boy, who'd been abandoned by his biological father, was offering me the most precious gift I'd ever received, the chance to be the father he deserved. "I would be honored if you called me Dad," I told him, and I meant every word. Those first few years of our marriage were magical in ways I still remember with painful clarity. We moved into a beautiful 6,000-square-foot colonial house on 3 acres in Westchester County. Enough space for the family we were building together, with a pool where Quentin learned to swim, a tennis court where I taught him to serve, and a circular driveway where he would eventually learn to drive stick shift. I threw myself into being the father Quentin had never had, teaching him to throw a curveball in our backyard, helping him with advanced calculus homework at the granite kitchen island Isabella had chosen during our renovation, attending every Little League game and cheering from the sidelines as he developed into their starting pitcher with a fastball that could hit 85 mph by his junior year of high school. I paid for everything gladly and without hesitation. Choate Rosemary Hall Prep School at $58,000 annually, an investment in his future that I considered one of the best decisions I'd ever made. Summer baseball camps where he refined his pitching technique. Private tutoring when he struggled with advanced chemistry. SAT preparation courses that helped him score in the 99th percentile. When he got into Columbia University for his undergraduate degree, I felt prouder than I had about any pharmaceutical breakthrough I'd ever achieved. I covered the full $320,000 cost over 4 years without a second thought. Watching him graduate summa cum laude with a degree in economics was worth every penny. "You're giving him opportunities I never could have provided alone," Isabella told me as we watched him cross the stage at Columbia's graduation ceremony in May 2019. "He's going to do something important with his life because you believed in him and invested in his potential." After graduation, Quentin moved back into the guest house on our property while he figured out his next steps. He'd been accepted to Wharton for his MBA, and I was more than happy to support him through graduate school as well. The guest house was perfect for a young man who needed independence but wasn't quite ready to be completely on his own. Separate entrance, full kitchen, living area, but still close enough for family dinners and casual conversations. But I should have noticed when things started changing. Should have paid attention to the subtle shifts in how he talked about our family, our relationship, his future plans. Family dinners became obligations he'd rush through to meet friends. Conversations about his career always seemed to center on what he expected to inherit rather than what he planned to contribute to society. Most troubling were the small financial discrepancies I'd started noticing over the past year. Nothing dramatic, $800 missing from my checking account here, $200 in unauthorized credit card charges there, amounts significant enough to notice but small enough that I'd attributed them to automatic payments or subscription services I'd forgotten about. I should have investigated more thoroughly, should have trusted the instincts that had served me well in pharmaceutical development, where attention to detail could mean the difference between life and death for patients. Instead, I dismissed my concerns as the normal worries of a father who'd invested so much in his son's future. I was about to learn just how catastrophically wrong that assumption had been. But then that social media video on Friday, May 17th, 2024, at 6:23 p.m. Eastern Time, revealed the true extent of Quentin's deception, and I realized the young man I'd raised as my own son had been systematically planning for my death while stealing from me in the present. I was in my home office in Westchester County, reviewing Phase 3 clinical trial data for a new rheumatoid arthritis medication our company was developing. The work required intense concentration. We were analyzing efficacy results that could determine whether millions of patients would have access to a treatment that might give them their lives back. After 25 years in pharmaceutical research, I understood that every day we delayed approval meant continued suffering for people who were counting on us to provide hope. The office was quiet, except for the soft hum of my computer and the distant sound of Quentin moving around in the guest house. He'd been living there rent-free for 5 years now, supposedly working on various startup ideas that never seemed to progress beyond elaborate PowerPoint presentations and requests for additional funding. My iPhone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. Someone had tagged me in a comment on a video. Usually, I ignored social media entirely, preferring to focus on work and family rather than digital distractions. But this tag came from Brandon Wells, one of Quentin's Columbia friends, who occasionally attended our family barbecues and had always seemed like a decent, well-raised young man. The video showed Quentin at what looked like an expensive rooftop bar in Manhattan, probably one of those places where cocktails cost $25, and the view of Central Park justified inflated prices that most young people couldn't afford. He was clearly intoxicated, gesticulating wildly while several friends recorded him with their phones, apparently finding his rant entertaining enough to document and share. He was wearing the $3,200 Rolex Submariner I'd given him for his MBA graduation just 2 months earlier, drinking what appeared to be top-shelf whiskey that cost more per ounce than most people made per hour. His designer clothes, probably $1,000 worth of shirts and jeans, were items he couldn't possibly afford on the non-existent income from his perpetually developing startup ventures. "You guys don't understand my situation," he was saying to his laughing audience, his speech slurred but his words unmistakably clear. "I honestly can't wait for the old man to die so I can finally get what's coming to me. That house, the money, the investment accounts, everything he's been hoarding while I have to live like some broke graduate student." The casual cruelty was breathtaking, but he wasn't finished destroying 17 years of what I'd thought was genuine father-son love. "The best part is, he actually thinks I love him," Quentin continued, prompting more laughter from his audience of enablers. "He's not my real father anyway, just some pharmaceutical suit who thinks buying me stuff means he owns me. But joke's on him. I've been getting plenty of use out of his credit cards and that checkbook he stupidly leaves in his desk drawer." My hands went cold as I realized what he was admitting to. For the past 6 months, I'd been noticing small discrepancies in my checking account, amounts I'd attributed to subscription services or automatic payments I'd forgotten about. But Quentin was confessing to systematic theft, treating my generosity as stupidity and my trust as weakness. The video continued, and what I heard next made me feel physically sick. "Last month, I sold his dead wife's jewelry collection to some dealer in the Diamond District," he said, taking another swig of expensive whiskey. "Made 15 grand off those old-fashioned pieces she used to love so much. Guy said the stuff was worth twice that, but I needed quick cash for the Miami trip with Sarah, Isabella's jewelry. The pieces she'd inherited from her grandmother, including a 1920s Art Deco necklace that had been in her family for 3 generations. Items I'd been saving in our bedroom safe, thinking someday I'd give them to Quentin's future wife, imagining they'd remain in our family forever. He'd stolen and sold family heirlooms to fund vacation trips while sitting at our dinner table pretending to care about preserving his mother's memory. And get this," Quentin continued, his voice getting louder and more animated. "My real father called last week wanting money, told him I'd hook him up as soon as the old man kicks it, but for now he'll have to wait like everyone else. Not like Emmerich's going anywhere. Guy's only 55 and annoyingly healthy. Might be waiting another 20 years for my real payday. My real father." Arden Kane, The man who'd abandoned Isabella and 6-year-old Quentin, leaving them with nothing but debt and broken promises. The man whose absence had created the space for me to become the father this child desperately needed. And now Quentin was planning to reward Cain's abandonment with money I'd earned through decades of hard work and sacrifice. The video ended with Quentin and his friends toasting to inheritance planning and playing the long game, their laughter echoing through my home office like the sound of everything I'd built, with this young man crashing down around me. But I knew this was just the beginning of what I'd discover. Over the weekend, I conducted a thorough audit of my financial accounts, security cameras, and personal belongings that revealed a pattern of systematic betrayal spanning almost 2 years. Bank statements showed forged signatures on checks totaling $31,000 over 18 months, money stolen to fund the luxury lifestyle he'd been flaunting while living rent-free in my guest house, credit card charges for expensive dinners, designer clothing, weekend trips to Miami and Las Vegas, all authorized using cards he'd somehow obtained access to, despite never being listed as an authorized user. Security camera footage from my home office showed Quentin entering the room repeatedly over the past year, always when Isabella and I were traveling for work. He'd learned my safe combination somehow, probably by watching me enter it during one of the many times I'd retrieved important documents in his presence, and had been systematically removing cash, jewelry, and other valuable items. Most devastating was the discovery that he'd been planning this betrayal for much longer than the video suggested. Hidden in his laptop, which I accessed using parental controls I'd established years earlier, were detailed spreadsheets calculating my net worth, researching inheritance tax laws, even investigating ways to accelerate the process of probate after my death. One document, dated 8 months earlier, was titled Financial Independence Timeline, and contained detailed projections of when he could expect to inherit various assets based on actuarial life expectancy tables for men in my age bracket and income level. Another file contained research into my life insurance policies, including attempts to determine whether the death benefits would be delayed if my death were deemed suspicious by investigators. The cold calculation required to research such things about someone who'd loved and supported him unconditionally for 17 years was almost incomprehensible. But perhaps most heartbreaking was an email chain with Arden Cain dating back 6 months, where Quentin had been feeding his biological father information about my assets, my health, my travel schedule, and my relationship with Isabella. Cain had been pressuring Quentin to accelerate his inheritance through various schemes, some barely legal, others explicitly criminal. By Sunday evening, I had documented evidence of systematic theft, inheritance fraud conspiracy, and financial exploitation that could have sent Quentin to federal prison for decades. But I wasn't interested in destroying his life through criminal prosecution. I was interested in something more poetic, making sure he learned that actions have consequences, and that the man he'd dismissed as a naive pharmaceutical suit understood exactly how to protect his life's work from people who saw generosity as weakness. That's when I realized Quentin had made the most catastrophic mistake of his young life. He thought I was a naive stepfather, too emotionally attached to see his manipulation, too financially comfortable to notice his stealing. He was about to learn that someone who'd built a career making life-or-death decisions in pharmaceutical development knew exactly how to plan for strategic outcomes. Monday morning, May 20th, I called Jonathan Ashworth, the estate planning attorney who'd been handling my family's legal affairs for nearly 2 decades. Jonathan had structured our wills when Isabella and I married, updated them after her death from pancreatic cancer in 2021, and helped establish the various trusts and accounts that protected our wealth from taxes and potential lawsuits. "Emmerich," he said when his secretary put me through at exactly 9 a.m., "good to hear from you. How are you holding up? I know Quentin's graduation was just a couple months ago. You must be incredibly proud of everything he's accomplished." The irony in that statement was almost too much to bear, but I kept my voice professionally neutral. "Actually, Jonathan, that's exactly what I need to discuss with you. Can you meet me this afternoon? This is urgent, and I need complete confidentiality regarding what we're going to discuss." "Of course. Is everything all right?" You sound different. Everything will be all right once we handle this properly. 2 o'clock at your office. I'll clear my schedule. Jonathan's office in White Plains overlooked the Westchester County Courthouse, where he'd practiced family law and estate planning for 35 years. His walls displayed certificates from the New York Bar Association, photographs with various judges and politicians, and the kind of understated luxury that suggested success built on competence rather than flashiness. He'd handled estate planning for some of the wealthiest families in Westchester County, including several pharmaceutical executives like myself, who needed sophisticated strategies to protect assets from both taxation and family disputes. I arrived at his office carrying a leather briefcase containing everything I'd discovered over the weekend: printed screenshots of the social media video, bank statements showing forged signatures, security camera footage burned onto DVDs, and printed copies of Quentin's conspiracy emails with Arden Kane. "Jonathan," I said as I settled into the leather chair across from his mahogany desk, "I need you to prepare yourself for what I'm about to show you. This involves someone we both care about, and it's going to be difficult to process." I started with the video, playing the audio on my phone while showing him the printed screenshots. Watching Jonathan's expression change from confusion to shock to something approaching anger was almost as painful as discovering the betrayal itself. "Jesus Christ, Emmerich," he said after the recording finished, "this isn't just family drama or youthful indiscretion. This is systematic financial fraud combined with conspiracy to commit inheritance fraud. It gets worse." I showed him the bank statements with forged check signatures, the credit card charges for items Quentin couldn't afford, the security camera footage of him accessing my home office and personal safe. But the documents that made Jonathan actually stand up from his desk were the emails with Arden Kane discussing ways to accelerate my death for insurance and inheritance purposes. "Emmerich, you could have him arrested right now," Jonathan said, pacing behind his desk with the agitation of a man who'd seen every kind of family betrayal but never anything quite this calculated. "Federal charges for wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. He'd be looking at 20 years in federal prison. That's not what I want. What do you want?" I thought about Isabella, about the 17 years I'd spent raising Quentin as my own son, about the dreams we'd shared for his future, and the pride I'd felt watching him succeed. All of it had been built on lies, manipulation, and a level of callous calculation that showed he'd never loved me at all. "I want complete removal from my will and all associated trusts. Every penny he expected to inherit, I want redirected towards something meaningful. Disinheriting someone you've raised as your own son. That's irreversible, Emmerich. Are you absolutely certain about this?" "I'm certain. But Jonathan, I don't want the money to just disappear. I want to establish something that honors Isabella's memory while ensuring the resources go to people who will actually contribute to society." Over the next 2 hours, we structured what would become the most satisfying estate revision of my life. The Isabella Morrison Memorial Scholarship Fund would receive $5.2 million, the exact amount Quentin would have inherited, to provide full college funding for students pursuing careers in pediatric oncology research. "This will continue your wife's legacy while ensuring the money goes to people who understand the value of hard work and genuine contribution," Jonathan observed as we reviewed the paperwork. "Quentin chose to see your generosity as weakness and your love as stupidity. These scholarship recipients will see both as opportunities to build something meaningful." The legal documentation was comprehensive and ironclad. New will with specific language explaining the disinheritance and the reasons behind it. Trust modifications, removing Quentin from any current or future financial benefits. Power of attorney revocations that prevented him from making any decisions about my care or assets if I became incapacitated. But I wasn't finished planning. I also called Sylvan Fleming, a private investigator who specialized in financial fraud cases and had worked with several pharmaceutical companies investigating employee theft and industrial espionage. "Sylvan, I need a comprehensive investigation of financial fraud committed by a family member. This needs to be thorough enough to stand up in court if necessary, but discreet enough to avoid creating public embarrassment for people who don't deserve it. What's the scope of the investigation? 18 months of systematic theft, forged documents, conspiracy with a third party to commit inheritance fraud, and potential insurance fraud conspiracy. The perpetrator has been living in my home while stealing from me and planning for my death. Jesus. Family member? My stepson, someone I raised from age 8 and supported through Ivy League education. I'll start immediately. Give me 1 week to compile everything. But even as I planned Quentin's financial and legal consequences, I knew the hardest part would be the emotional confrontation. This wasn't just about money or inheritance. It was about 17 years of genuine love that had been met with calculated exploitation. Over the next 2 weeks, I maintained perfect normalcy in our daily interactions. Family dinners where Quentin would tell me about his startup ideas while wearing clothes purchased with money he'd stolen from me. Casual conversations about his future plans that now felt like someone describing how they planned to benefit from my death. The most difficult part was pretending not to know about Isabella's jewelry. Several evenings, I'd catch myself looking at the empty spaces in our bedroom where her necklaces and bracelets used to rest in their velvet-lined boxes. Items that had connected our family to 3 generations of women, now sold to fund vacation trips and luxury purchases for someone who'd never valued the history they represented. But I maintained my facade because I wanted the confrontation to be perfect. I wanted Quentin to walk into our family kitchen expecting another conversation about funding his latest business venture, only to discover that the man he'd dismissed as a naive pharmaceutical suit had been strategically planning consequences for actions that had destroyed 17 years of unconditional love. Are you Team Emmerich? Let me know what you would have done. And don't forget to hit that like button if you're loving this story. New ebook alert. I just wrote The Wolf's Justice, my first ebook exclusively for you, my viewers. Strategic revenge wisdom from every story we've shared. Name your price, $0 to $25. Transform betrayal into power, weakness into strength. Link is in the video description or scan the QR code on the screen to grab your copy now. Let's continue. The moment Quentin walked through our kitchen door on Monday, June 3, 2024, at 7:30 p.m., expecting to ask for another loan to fund his perpetually developing startup, I knew it was time. What he discovered next would change everything forever. I'd spent 2 weeks executing the most comprehensive disinheritance in New York legal history, while maintaining perfect normalcy in our daily interactions. The new will had been signed, witnessed, and filed with the appropriate authorities. The Isabella Morrison Memorial Scholarship Fund had been established with initial funding of $5.2 million. Sylvan Fleming had compiled a comprehensive investigation report documenting $47,000 in theft over 18 months. But Quentin had no idea that anything had changed in his carefully constructed world. He entered through the kitchen door from the guest house, carrying himself with the casual confidence of someone who believed his inheritance was guaranteed, regardless of his behavior. He was wearing designer jeans that probably cost more than most people spent on clothing in 6 months, and a polo shirt that I now knew had been purchased with money stolen from my accounts. "Hey, Dad," he said with the artificial warmth he'd perfected over the past year. "Got a minute to talk about something? I've got some exciting updates about the app development project, and I think we're ready to move to the next phase." The app development project. Another elaborate fiction designed to extract money from someone he was planning to replace with his biological father the moment I died. "Actually, Quentin, I've been waiting for you to come in. Please, have a seat at the kitchen table. We need to discuss several important matters that can't wait any longer." Something in my tone must have alerted him to the fact that this wasn't going to be another routine conversation about funding his lifestyle. I watched his expression shift from casual confidence to cautious attention as he took in the formal way I'd arranged 3 manila folders on the granite surface where we'd shared thousands of meals during his childhood. This kitchen had been the center of our family life for 17 years. Homework sessions where I'd helped him with advanced mathematics and chemistry. Birthday celebrations where Isabella would make his favorite chocolate cake from scratch. Late-night conversations about his dreams and ambitions that I genuinely believed in supporting. Now it would be the place where I'd explain why that relationship was ending permanently. "These documents contain some information I've uncovered recently," I said, opening the first folder to reveal printed screenshots from his social media video, "including your thoughts about my death and your inheritance expectations." The change in his expression was immediate and unmistakable. The artificial warmth disappeared, replaced by the kind of calculating alertness I'd seen in pharmaceutical executives who'd been caught falsifying clinical trial data. His eyes darted between the screenshots and my face, probably trying to determine how much I knew and whether he could manufacture an explanation that would minimize the consequences. "Dad, I can explain that video. I was drunk, saying stupid things to impress people. You know how guys talk when they've had too much to drink. It didn't mean anything. Please don't insult my intelligence with explanations," I replied calmly. "I've heard everything I need to hear from your own mouth." I opened the second folder, revealing Sylvan Fleming's investigation report, bank statements with forged signatures highlighted in yellow, credit card charges for luxury items and travel circled in red, security camera screenshots showing him accessing my home office and personal safe at times when he thought Isabella and I were away. $47,000 in theft over 18 months, I said, consulting the executive summary with the professional tone I'd perfected during 25 years of delivering both good and devastating news to patients and families. Forged checks, unauthorized credit card charges, theft of cash from my home office, and the sale of your mother's jewelry collection for $15,000. His face went pale as he realized the comprehensive scope of what I'd discovered. This wasn't about a single drunken video. This was about documented evidence of systematic financial fraud. "Furthermore," I continued, turning to the third page of the report, "your biological father, Arden Kane, contacted you seeking money, and you promised to hook him up after I died. You've been feeding him information about my assets, my health, my travel schedule. The two of you have been discussing ways to accelerate the probate process after my death. That's not... I never meant... You never meant what exactly? You never meant to steal from me while I supported you. You never meant to sell your mother's jewelry to fund vacation trips. You never meant to research whether my life insurance would pay out quickly if my death looked suspicious." I activated my phone's speaker and played the audio from his social media video, letting his own voice fill the kitchen where Isabella had made pancakes for him every Sunday morning for 10 years. His casual cruelty, his dismissal of me as a pharmaceutical suit, his excitement about inheriting everything I'd worked to build. When the recording finished, the silence was absolute, except for the ticking of the antique grandfather clock Isabella had found at a flea market in Vermont during our second year of marriage. "Effective immediately," I announced, opening the third folder to reveal legal documents bearing the seal of the New York State court system. "You are removed from my will, all associated trusts, and any claim to inheritance from my estate." The documents were official, legal, and irreversible, exactly what Jonathan Ashworth had promised when we'd structured the disinheritance. "The $5.2 million you expected to receive has been donated to establish the Isabella Morrison Memorial Scholarship Fund for students pursuing careers in pediatric oncology research. The money will go to young people who understand the value of hard work, genuine contribution, and honoring the memory of someone who dedicated her life to saving children." I watched the color drain from his face as the reality hit him. Not just disinheritance, but the knowledge that his expected inheritance was now funding scholarships for people who represented everything he'd chosen not to become. "You can't do this to me," Quentin said, his voice rising to a level I'd never heard during 17 years of parenting. "I'm your son. You raised me. You can't just throw me away because of some stupid mistakes." "You're not my son anymore," I replied quietly. "My son wouldn't have stolen from me while planning for my death. My son wouldn't have sold his mother's jewelry to fund vacation trips. My son wouldn't have conspired with the man who abandoned him to exploit the generosity of the only father who ever cared about his future." I stood up and walked to the kitchen window overlooking the pool where he'd learned to swim, the tennis court where I'd taught him to serve, the yard where we'd played catch for hours during his Little League years. Every corner of this property held memories of a relationship I'd thought was genuine, but now understood had been performance art designed to secure financial benefits. "You have 30 days to vacate the guest house," I said, without turning around. "Your credit cards are cancelled as of this morning. The BMW is being repossessed tomorrow morning. It was registered in my name as a gift for your graduation, which makes it legally my property." "This is completely insane," he shouted. "You're destroying my entire life over some misunderstanding about money." I turned back to face him, this young man I'd loved as deeply as any biological father could love his child, and felt nothing but sadness for the person he'd chosen to become. "I'm not destroying anything, Quentin. You destroyed it yourself when you decided that stealing from me and planning for my death was easier than building your own life through honest work. You destroyed it when you chose to see my generosity as stupidity and my love as weakness. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? You're 25 years old with an MBA from Wharton. Figure it out the same way millions of other young people do, through hard work, integrity, and building something meaningful instead of waiting for someone else to die. Your biological father abandoned you when you were 6 years old and only contacted you because he thought you'd inherit money he could steal. If you want to build a relationship with Arden Kane based on mutual exploitation, that's your choice. But don't expect him to provide the same unconditional support you've been taking advantage of here." I gathered up the manila folders and stood to leave, but Quentin's next words stopped me at the kitchen doorway. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice carrying a threat I'd never heard from him before. "I know things about your business dealings, about shortcuts you've taken in drug development. I could make your life very difficult if you don't reconsider this." I turned back to look at him, this young man who'd just revealed the final layer of his character, someone willing to destroy the reputation of the man who'd raised him if it served his financial interests. "Quentin, I've spent 25 years developing medications that save lives while maintaining the highest ethical standards in pharmaceutical research. If you want to investigate my business practices, you'll find a career built on integrity and dedication to patient welfare. But if you want to make threats about destroying my reputation," I continued, "remember that I have 18 months of documented evidence showing you've committed multiple federal crimes: wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit inheritance fraud, theft of family assets. Choose your next words very carefully." The threat died on his lips as he realized I held all the leverage in any potential conflict between us. "You have 30 days, I repeated. "After that, you'll be trespassing on my property, and I'll have you arrested." I left him sitting alone in the kitchen where we'd shared 17 years of what I'd thought was genuine family love, but now understood had been nothing more than an elaborate performance designed to secure his financial future at the expense of my emotional well-being. The hardest part wasn't anger at his betrayal. It was grief for the relationship I'd thought we'd built, and the young man I'd believed he was becoming. But by the time I reached my home office, that grief was already transforming into something more productive, satisfaction that I'd protected my life's work from someone who'd never deserved it. The next few weeks unfolded exactly as I'd predicted, revealing the true character of everyone involved in this elaborate deception while validating every decision I'd made about protecting my legacy from people who saw generosity as weakness. Within 48 hours of our kitchen confrontation, Quentin had contacted Arden Kane to arrange moving into his small apartment in Queens. The reunion between biological father and son lasted exactly 6 days before Kane realized that Quentin's inheritance had disappeared and his meal ticket had been permanently revoked. I learned about their falling out through Sylvan Fleming, who continued monitoring the situation to ensure they weren't planning any retaliatory actions that might threaten my safety or financial security. The biological father kicked him out on June 11th, Sylvan reported during our weekly phone call. Apparently, Kane had been planning to use Quentin's inheritance to pay off gambling debts and fund some kind of cryptocurrency investment scheme. When he found out the money was gone, he told Quentin he wasn't interested in having a relationship with a son who couldn't contribute to the family finances. The irony was perfect. Quentin had betrayed the father who'd loved him unconditionally for 17 years in favor of a biological father who only valued him for potential financial gain. When that money disappeared, Kane's interest in building a relationship evaporated just as quickly as his gambling debts had accumulated. By mid-June, Quentin was living in a studio apartment in Astoria, Queens, working as a junior analyst at a small investment firm that paid $52,000 annually, less than I'd been spending on his car insurance and credit card bills. The luxury lifestyle he'd maintained through systematic theft was no longer sustainable on an entry-level salary. His attempts to challenge the disinheritance proved as unsuccessful as his attempts to reconcile with Arden Kane. The attorney he hired with money borrowed from college friends reviewed Jonathan Ashworth's documentation and advised him that contesting the will would be futile and expensive. The court will uphold disinheritance when there's clear evidence of financial fraud and theft, the attorney explained during their consultation, according to Sylvan Fleming's continued monitoring. Your stepfather has documented proof of systematic stealing, forged checks, and conspiracy with a third party. No judge in New York would overturn this decision, but the most satisfying validation came from the success of the Isabella Morrison Memorial Scholarship Fund. Within 6 months of its establishment, the fund had grown to $6.8 million through additional donations and investment returns, and we were supporting 47 deserving students pursuing careers in pediatric oncology research. The first scholarship recipients sent me letters describing how the funding had changed their lives, brilliant young people who might never have had the opportunity to develop treatments that would save children like the ones Isabella had spent her career trying to help. Every letter validated the decision to redirect Quentin's inheritance towards something meaningful. One letter particularly moved me. Ravenna Sable, a 22-year-old student at Johns Hopkins studying pediatric oncology, wrote, "Mr. Frost, because of the Isabella Morrison Memorial Scholarship, I can focus entirely on my research instead of working 2 jobs to pay for graduate school. I'm developing new targeted therapies for childhood brain cancers, and I think about Mrs. Morrison's legacy every day when I'm in the lab. Thank you for making it possible for people like me to continue her work." That letter meant more to me than any gratitude Quentin had ever expressed during 17 years of receiving unconditional support. Ravenna Sable understood that opportunity was a gift to be honored through contribution, not exploitation. Meanwhile, Quentin's life continued its predictable downward trajectory. His college friends stopped inviting him to expensive social events he could no longer afford. The designer clothes and luxury accessories purchased with stolen money began wearing out, and he couldn't afford to replace them. The carefully cultivated image of success that had attracted friends and romantic partners evaporated along with his access to my financial resources. Most tellingly, he made several attempts to reconcile with me over the following months, not out of genuine remorse, but because he'd finally realized the practical consequences of his choices. Phone calls that went straight to voicemail, emails that were automatically filtered to a folder I never opened, even an attempt to approach me at a pharmaceutical industry conference in Manhattan, which security handled efficiently after I'd provided them with photos and a brief explanation of our situation. The personal growth I experienced through this process surprised me. 6 months after removing Quentin from my life, I began dating Amanda Winters, a pediatric oncologist at Memorial Sloan Kettering, who had known and respected Isabella's work. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual professional respect and shared values about integrity and contribution. "You honored your wife's memory in the most beautiful way possible," Amanda told me when I explained the scholarship fund during one of our early dinner conversations. "Isabella would be proud that her legacy is helping save more children and supporting young researchers who understand the importance of the work." The house felt peaceful for the first time in years. No longer did I need to wonder whether my generosity was being exploited, whether family conversations were genuine, or whether someone was systematically stealing from me while planning for my death. The guest house stood empty for several months before I converted it into a home office and research library, a space where I could work on consulting projects that continued advancing pharmaceutical development. Eleanor Morrison, Isabella's sister, visited regularly, and we developed the kind of honest family relationship that had never been possible when Quentin's deception cast shadows over every interaction. Eleanor had never trusted Quentin completely, and she admitted feeling relieved that I'd finally discovered the truth about his character. Isabella worried about him sometimes, Eleanor confided during one of our Sunday afternoon conversations in my kitchen. She loved him completely, but she noticed how he'd started taking your generosity for granted. She was planning to talk to you about setting clearer boundaries and expectations for his behavior. That conversation took place just a few months before Isabella's diagnosis, when we were all focused on fighting her cancer rather than addressing family dynamics. But knowing that Isabella had shared similar concerns validated my decision to protect our shared legacy from someone who'd never appreciated the sacrifices that made his opportunities possible. The most unexpected consequence of the entire situation was how it affected my professional relationships. Several pharmaceutical executives who learned about the disinheritance reached out privately to share similar stories about family members who'd exploited their generosity or planned to benefit from their deaths. The pharmaceutical industry, built on long-term research and development investments, attracted many successful professionals who struggled with balancing family generosity and personal boundaries. "You did what most of us don't have the courage to do," Robert Blackwood, CEO of Biodyne Therapeutics, told me during a private conversation at an industry dinner. "My own nephew has been stealing from me for years, but I keep making excuses because he's family. Your situation shows that sometimes protecting your legacy requires making difficult decisions about people you love." That conversation led to my involvement with a support group for successful professionals dealing with financial exploitation by family members. We met monthly in a conference room at Jonathan Ashworth's law firm, sharing experiences and strategies for protecting assets while maintaining healthy family relationships with people who genuinely deserved support and trust. The group included executives from various industries: technology, finance, healthcare, real estate, all of whom had discovered that success could attract exploitation from the very people they most wanted to help. Our discussions helped me understand that Quentin's betrayal wasn't unique or personal. It was a pattern of behavior that affected many families, where generosity was mistaken for weakness. By December 2024, exactly 7 months after discovering Quentin's betrayal, I felt more at peace than I had since Isabella's death. The scholarship fund continued growing and supporting deserving students. My relationship with Amanda had developed into something meaningful and lasting. My career remained fulfilling, with new consulting opportunities that utilize decades of pharmaceutical expertise to help smaller companies navigate regulatory challenges. Most importantly, I'd learned to distinguish between people who deserved my generosity and people who exploited it. The lesson had been expensive, both financially and emotionally, but the knowledge would protect me for the rest of my life. During one of our monthly support group meetings, Jonathan Ashworth observed something that perfectly captured what I'd learned from the experience. The people who deserve your generosity are the ones who never demand it. The people who exploit your generosity are the ones who see it as an entitlement rather than a gift. That wisdom applied to the scholarship recipients who sent grateful letters, to Amanda, who appreciated but never expected expensive gifts, to Eleanor, who valued our relationship for emotional rather than financial reasons, and to the countless patients whose lives had been improved by pharmaceutical research I'd helped develop throughout my career. By the spring of 2025, I'd established additional charitable foundations focusing on pharmaceutical research and education. The Isabella Morrison Research Institute, funded with another $3 million from my estate, provided grants for innovative pediatric oncology studies. The Ethical Pharmaceutical Development Foundation supported young researchers who demonstrated both scientific brilliance and uncompromising integrity. These foundations would continue Isabella's work long after I was gone, supporting people who understood that opportunity was a responsibility rather than an entitlement. Every grant recipient, every scholarship student, every research project represented the choice to build something meaningful rather than simply waiting for someone else to die. Looking back 18 months later, I discovered that family isn't defined by blood relationships, legal documents, or financial expectations. It's defined by mutual respect, genuine love, and the kind of loyalty that survives even when inheritance isn't guaranteed. I'm sitting in my home office on this quiet Sunday morning in January 2026, reviewing applications for the third year of Isabella Morrison Memorial Scholarships. The fund has grown to $8.7 million through additional donations and investment returns and will be supporting 63 deserving students pursuing careers in pediatric oncology research. The applications remind me why redirecting Quentin's inheritance was the right decision. These young people write about their passion for saving children's lives, their commitment to advancing medical research, their understanding that opportunity comes with responsibility. They represent everything Quentin had chosen not to become: hardworking, grateful, dedicated to contributing rather than simply consuming. One application particularly moved me this morning. Michael Torres, a 23-year-old from a working-class family in Texas, wrote, "My little sister died from leukemia when she was 7, and I've wanted to become a pediatric oncologist ever since. The Isabella Morrison Memorial Scholarship would allow me to focus entirely on my studies instead of working nights to pay for medical school. I promise to honor Mrs. Morrison's legacy by dedicating my career to saving children like my sister." That application represented exactly what Isabella would have wanted, her memory inspiring someone who understood both the importance of the work and the value of the opportunity being provided. Michael Torres would use his scholarship to build something meaningful, not to fund vacation trips or luxury purchases while waiting for someone to die. Quentin's life, meanwhile, continued its predictable decline. According to Sylvan Fleming's occasional updates, he'd been fired from the investment firm for attendance problems and attitude issues. His current employment situation remained unclear, though he'd been seen working at various retail positions in Queens, jobs that paid barely enough to cover rent and basic living expenses. His attempts to reconnect with college friends had failed as his financial situation deteriorated. The social circle that had laughed at his cruel jokes about my death disappeared when he could no longer afford expensive dinners and weekend trips. He'd learned the hard way that relationships built on shared consumption, rather than genuine affection, evaporate quickly when the funding disappears. Most satisfying was the knowledge that Arden Kane had completely severed contact with Quentin once it became clear there would be no inheritance to steal. The biological father who'd abandoned a 6-year-old child had abandoned that same child again as a 25-year-old adult, proving that blood relationships mean nothing without character and commitment. The house where Quentin had grown up, learned to drive, celebrated birthdays and graduations, now hosted different kinds of family gatherings. Amanda's nephews visited regularly, well-behaved children who appreciated our pool and tennis court without demanding ownership of them. Eleanor brought her grandchildren for Sunday dinners, where conversation focused on achievements and aspirations rather than inheritance expectations. These gatherings reminded me what healthy family relationships looked like: mutual affection, reasonable expectations, gratitude for opportunities provided, and respect for the people who provided them. The contrast with Quentin's systematic exploitation couldn't have been starker. At 57, surrounded by people who valued me for who I am, rather than what I could provide, I've learned the most important lesson of my life. The best inheritance you can leave isn't money. It's the knowledge that your resources went to people who deserved them and would use them to make the world better. Sometimes the most painful betrayals teach the most valuable lessons about what actually matters in life. Loyalty can't be purchased with generosity. Love can't be guaranteed by providing opportunities. Respect must be earned through character rather than demanded through blood relations or legal documents. The voice in that social media video, casually discussing my death and dismissing 17 years of unconditional love, had revealed Quentin's true character more clearly than any conversation we'd ever had. His willingness to steal from me while planning to replace me with his biological father showed a level of calculated cruelty that made disinheritance not just appropriate, but necessary. But the most beautiful outcome of this painful experience was discovering how many people genuinely appreciated the opportunity to continue Isabella's work. The scholarship recipients, the research grant winners, the young doctors who would spend their careers saving children, they represented the family I'd really been building through decades of hard work and principled decision-making. Ever wonder how some men turn betrayal into empire? The Wolf's Justice eBook reveals the blueprint, Real psychology, proven tactics, zero fluff. Name your investment, $0 to $25. Link is in the video description or scan the QR code on the screen to download now. Legacy isn't about accumulating wealth for people who'll waste it. It's about creating opportunities for people who'll use them responsibly. It's about supporting individuals who understand that success comes with obligations, not just privileges. The Isabella Morrison Memorial Scholarship Fund, the Research Institute, the charitable foundations. These would continue growing and making a difference long after everyone involved in this family drama had been forgotten. The students whose education we funded would become doctors who saved lives. The researchers whose work we supported would develop treatments that prevented other families from experiencing the loss Isabella and I had faced. That impact, multiplied across decades and generations, represented a more meaningful inheritance than any amount of money transferred to someone who'd planned to waste it on luxury consumption while waiting for me to die. On quiet Sunday mornings like this, reviewing applications from brilliant young people who understood the value of opportunity, I felt the deep satisfaction of knowing that my life's work would continue making the world better through people who deserve the chance to build something meaningful. What's the most satisfying moment of justice you've witnessed? Share your story in the comments. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and also share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story for incredible tales of justice served, click on the box on the left. Stay sharp and healthy out there. See you in the next video.